August 15, 1972, 3:47 a.m. Elvis Presley stands in his Graceland kitchen, holding a piece of paper that will destroy everything he thought he knew about his marriage. The woman sleeping upstairs, the mother of his child, his wife of 5 years, has been living a lie so devastating that it will change not just their relationship, but the final chapter of Elvis's life. His hands are shaking, not from the pills this time, not from exhaustion or the crushing weight of fame, but from the words written in Priscilla's careful handwriting, words that reveal a conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of his inner circle, a web of deception that had been growing for 3 years right under his nose. The paper falls from his fingers, floating to the kitchen floor like a white flag of surrender. But what Elvis discovered that night wasn't just about Priscilla's betrayal. It was about who he could trust when the people closest to you are the ones planning your future, without you in it. And his response, it would become the most closely guarded secret in rock and roll history, until now. Because what happened in that kitchen didn't just shatter a marriage, it revealed the truth about how far some people will go when there's $50 million at stake. And the most shocking part, the person Elvis thought was betraying him may have actually been the only one trying to save his life. To understand why this moment would haunt Elvis until his final day, we have to go back to a seemingly perfect evening just 6 months earlier, February 12, 1972, the Academy Awards after party at the Beverly Hills Hotel, when Priscilla made a phone call that would set everything in motion. Picture the most beautiful couple you've ever seen. Elvis in a midnight blue tuxedo, his black hair perfectly styled, the crooked smile that made millions of women weak in the knees. Priscilla beside him, stunning in a white silk gown that hugged her figure like it was painted on, her dark hair swept up to show off the diamond earrings he'd given her for their anniversary. They looked like Hollywood royalty. Hell, they were Hollywood royalty. Flash bulbs popped around them like stars exploding in the night sky. Reporters shouted questions over the orchestra playing in the background. Everyone wanted a piece of them, wanted to touch the magic that seemed to radiate from this perfect couple. But if you watched closely, really closely, you might have noticed something. The way Priscilla's smile never quite reached her eyes when she looked at her husband. The way Elvis's hand lingered just a fraction too long on the small of her back, like he was afraid she might slip away. The way they moved through that glittering crowd like two people playing the roles of their lives, but forgetting the script when they thought no one was looking. Elvis was riding high that February. His comeback special had reminded the world why they called him the king. His Vegas residency was breaking records. Money was pouring in faster than he could count it. But success, real success, has a way of making you paranoid about what you might lose. And Priscilla, she was watching, always watching, learning to read the signs that meant Elvis was about to disappear into himself, into the pills, into the endless cycle of performance and exhaustion that was slowly killing the man she'd fallen in love with when she was just 14 years old. The party swirled around them like a golden hurricane. Industry executives kissed their cheeks and whispered sweet promises about movie deals and recording contracts. Beautiful women smiled at Elvis with hunger in their eyes, while their husbands pretended not to notice. Everyone wanted something from them. Everyone had an agenda. But there was one moment, just one, when the perfect facade cracked. Elvis was deep in conversation with some studio head about a possible film project, gesturing with the whiskey glass he'd been nursing all night. Priscilla stood beside him, playing the dutiful wife, nodding at appropriate moments and laughing at jokes that weren't funny. Standard operating procedure for these Hollywood gatherings. Then she saw him, across the crowded ballroom, standing near the bar like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. A man in an expensive suit with silver hair and cold blue eyes. When their gazes met, something passed between them. Not romantic, no, this was business, dangerous business. The man raised his glass slightly, a gesture so subtle that if you blinked, you'd miss it. Priscilla nodded almost imperceptibly in return, a conversation without words, an agreement sealed with a look. Elvis was still talking, completely oblivious to the silent exchange happening right beside him, but Red West noticed. Jerry Schilling saw it too. These men who'd spent years protecting Elvis from every possible threat, and suddenly they were watching his wife communicate in code with a stranger. The rest of the party passed in a blur of champagne and hollow laughter. Elvis worked the room like the consummate performer he was, never letting anyone see the exhaustion that lived behind his eyes. Priscilla smiled and posed for photos, the picture of devoted wifehood. But that moment by the bar hung between them like a storm cloud. When they finally made it back to their suite at 3 in the morning, Elvis collapsed into bed without even taking off his tuxedo jacket. The pills and the performance had taken their toll. Within minutes, he was snoring softly, lost in whatever dreams came to men who lived their lives on stage. But Priscilla didn't sleep. She stood at the window, looking out at the city lights scattered below like fallen stars, waiting. When she was sure Elvis was deep under, she moved to the bathroom and closed the door behind her. The phone call was quiet, barely above a whisper, but if you'd been listening, really listening, you might have caught fragments that would chill your blood. "He doesn't know," she said into the receiver. "Not yet, but he's starting to ask questions." A pause, someone speaking on the other end, words Elvis would never hear. "I understand the timeline," Priscilla continued, "but if we move too fast, he'll get suspicious. Elvis isn't stupid, no matter what people think." Another pause, longer this time. "Yes, I'll stick to the plan, but remember what we agreed. No one gets hurt. That was the condition." The conversation ended as quietly as it began. Priscilla emerged from the bathroom to find Elvis exactly where she'd left him, dead to the world in his wrinkled tuxedo. She sat on the edge of the bed and studied his face in the dim light filtering through the curtains. There was so much pain there, even in sleep. Lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when they'd married. A tightness in his jaw that spoke of constant tension. This was a man carrying the weight of the world, and everyone wanted to add just a little bit more to his load. She reached out and touched his cheek gently, the way she used to when they were young and the future stretched ahead of them like an endless highway. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though he couldn't hear her. "I'm so sorry it has to be this way." Over the next few months, the signs were there if you knew what to look for. Priscilla's increasingly frequent trips to Los Angeles, always for shopping or visiting friends. Credit card statements that showed charges at restaurants Elvis had never been to, at times when she claimed to be at department stores. Phone calls that ended abruptly when he walked into the room. Elvis wasn't blind. His mama had raised him to notice when something wasn't right, and everything about Priscilla's behavior screamed that something was very, very wrong. But what could he do? Confront her? Demand to know why his wife was sneaking around like a criminal? The man who could command the attention of millions found himself powerless in his own marriage. The members of his inner circle started acting strange too. Colonel Parker, usually so smooth and confident, would grow nervous whenever Priscilla entered the room. Red West, who'd been Elvis's friend since high school, couldn't meet his eyes during conversations. Jerry Schilling, the most loyal man Elvis knew, suddenly had reasons to leave whenever Priscilla started talking about the future. It was like watching dominoes fall in slow motion, each piece of his world tilting just slightly off balance. Nothing you could put your finger on, nothing you could prove. But the feeling, God, the feeling that everyone around him was keeping secrets, that was eating him alive from the inside out. By August, Elvis's paranoia had reached a breaking point. He'd wake up in the middle of the night, his heart pounding, convinced that the people he loved most were plotting against him. During the day, he'd catch himself studying faces, looking for tells, for signs that someone was lying to him. The prescription bottles on his nightstand multiplied like rabbits, not just for sleep anymore, but for the anxiety that clawed at his chest every waking moment, for the depression that settled over him like a thick blanket when he realized that fame and fortune couldn't protect you from betrayal, especially when it came from inside your own house. But when he decided to follow Priscilla to her next shopping trip in Los Angeles, what he discovered would make every suspicious moment suddenly, terrifyingly make sense. And the person he found her with, someone he trusted more than his own blood, someone who held the keys to his kingdom, his career, and possibly his life. The truth was waiting for him in Beverly Hills, wrapped in legal documents and sealed with a handshake between people who thought they knew what was best for the king of rock and roll, whether he lived or died. August 3, 1972. Elvis sits behind the wheel of a rented Ford sedan, 3 cars back from Priscilla's white Mercedes, as it winds through the hills of Beverly Hills. He'd never followed anyone in his life. Hell, he was usually the one being followed. But desperation makes you do things you never thought possible. His hands are sweating on the steering wheel. Part of him hopes he's wrong about everything, that Priscilla really is just shopping, meeting friends, living the innocent life of a rock star's wife. But the other part, the part that's been eating at him for months, that part knows he's about to discover something that will change everything. Priscilla's Mercedes pulls into the parking garage of a gleaming office building on Rodeo Drive, the kind of place where lawyers and agents make deals that reshape careers and destroy lives. Elvis parks across the street, adjusting his sunglasses even though he's sitting in shadow. Old habits die hard when you're the most recognizable face in America. He watches her walk into the building with the confidence of someone who belongs there, someone who's made this trip many times before. The way she moves, the way she checks her watch, the way she glances around like she's making sure no one's following her, it's all wrong. This isn't shopping behavior. This is conspiracy behavior. 20 minutes pass, then 30. Elvis is starting to think maybe he really is losing his mind when the building's glass doors swing open and his world tilts off its axis. Colonel Parker steps out into the California sunshine, adjusting his tie like he's just finished the most important meeting of his life. Tom Parker, the man who's managed Elvis's career for 15 years, the man who claims to have Elvis's best interests at heart, walking out of the same building where his wife has been having secret meetings. Elvis feels like he's been punched in the stomach. The air conditioning in the rental car suddenly isn't enough. His chest tightens, and for a moment he wonders if this is what a heart attack feels like. Because seeing Parker emerge from that building doesn't just confirm his suspicions, it expands them into something much darker. If Parker's involved, this isn't about an affair. This is about business. And when Colonel Tom Parker conducts business in secret, people's lives change forever, usually not for the better. Elvis forces himself to stay calm, to think like the investigators in the movies he's watched late at night when the pills wouldn't let him sleep. He needs to see more. He needs to understand what they're planning before he makes his move. Another 15 minutes crawl by. The California sun beats down on the rental car, but Elvis doesn't notice the heat. He's focused on those glass doors like his life depends on it, which, given what he's starting to suspect, it might. Then he sees something that makes his blood run cold. Dr. George Nishapoulos, Dr. Nick, the man who's been prescribing Elvis's medication for the past 3 years, walks out of the building carrying a manila folder. The same Dr. Nick, who's always so concerned about Elvis's health, who warns him about taking too many pills while simultaneously writing prescriptions for hundreds more. The pieces start falling into place in Elvis's mind like dominoes in reverse. The medical records Dr. Nick insists on keeping so detailed, the way he's always pushing new medications, stronger doses, the concerned conversations about Elvis's declining health that happen just outside his hearing range. What if those conversations aren't about helping him get better? What if they're about documenting his decline for some other purpose? Elvis's paranoia, which he's been fighting for months, suddenly doesn't feel like paranoia anymore. It feels like survival instinct. He slides lower in his seat as Dr. Nick walks toward his car, that manila folder clutched tight against his chest like it contains state secrets. Maybe it does. Maybe it contains medical projections, life expectancy calculations, the kind of information that would be very valuable to people planning for a future without Elvis Presley in it. The doctor drives away, leaving Elvis alone with his racing thoughts and a growing certainty that everything he's believed about his life is a lie. But he doesn't have time to process the full horror of what he's discovering because those glass doors are opening again. This time, Elvis has to grip the steering wheel to keep from falling apart completely. Vernon Presley, his own father, steps out into the afternoon heat. The man who raised him, who's managed his personal finances, who's been by his side through every triumph and disaster of his career. Vernon looks around carefully before walking to his car, the same cautious behavior Elvis has been noticing in everyone close to him. The betrayal hits Elvis like a physical blow. Your wife might leave you, your manager might steal from you, your doctor might fail you, but your father, your own blood, the man who's supposed to protect you from the world. Elvis sits in that rental car and feels something break inside him that he knows will never heal. It's not just trust, it's deeper than that. It's the foundation of everything he thought he knew about love and family and loyalty. Four people, his wife, his manager, his doctor, and his father. The four people who have the most access to his life, his money, his medical care, his future. All of them meeting in secret, all of them carrying folders and papers and the kind of serious expressions that come with life-changing decisions. But what kind of decisions require this level of secrecy? What are they planning that they can't include the person it affects most? Elvis starts the rental car with shaking hands. He needs to get closer. He needs to hear what they're saying, understand what they're planning. Because sitting in this car, watching the people he loves most walk out of that building like they own his future, is going to drive him completely insane. He parks in the building's garage and takes the elevator to the floor where he saw them all disappear. The hallway is quiet, lined with doors bearing the names of entertainment lawyers, business managers, and the kind of people who make problems disappear for the right price. At the end of the hallway, behind a door marked private conference room, he can hear voices, familiar voices discussing unfamiliar things. Elvis presses himself against the wall and listens through the crack where the door doesn't quite meet the frame. The words he hears will haunt him for the rest of his life. The insurance policies are all in place. A voice he doesn't recognize says, $50 million in coverage with the enhanced payouts for accidental death. And the medical documentation, that's Colonel Parker's voice, businesslike and cold. Complete, Dr. Nick responds. The pattern of prescription increases, the documented health decline, the psychological evaluations. Everything needed to support the claim that his condition was deteriorating rapidly. What about timing? Vernon's voice barely above a whisper. That depends on how cooperative he becomes, the unknown voice says. The gradual approach gives us plausible deniability, but if he starts asking too many questions. Elvis's heart stops. They're not just planning for his death. They're planning it, orchestrating it, documenting it like it's a business transaction, which apparently it is. $50 million. That's what his life is worth to the people who claim to love him most. Elvis had two choices in that moment. Storm into that conference room and confront them with their conspiracy, or do something that went against every instinct he had as a husband, son, and trusting human being. He chose the path that would either save his life or destroy his soul forever, because what he discovered next would make him question everything he thought he knew about love, loyalty, and the price of being Elvis Presley. The real question wasn't whether they were planning to kill him. The question was whether he could survive learning the truth about why. Elvis drives back to Memphis in complete silence, his mind reeling from what he's just heard. $50 million, insurance policies, accidental death. The words keep repeating in his head like a broken record, each repetition making the reality more horrifying. By the time he pulls into Graceland's gates, he's made a decision that goes against every fiber of his being. Elvis Presley, the man who's always worn his heart on his sleeve, who's trusted people to a fault, is about to become someone he never thought he'd be. A spy in his own life. The next morning, Elvis makes a phone call to a number he got from a contact in the Memphis Police Department. Within hours, a private investigator named Jack Morrison is sitting in Elvis's study, listening to the most famous man in the world explain why he needs to investigate his own family. Morrison is a former FBI agent, the kind of man who's seen everything and been shocked by nothing. But even he raises an eyebrow when Elvis lays out what he's discovered. "You want me to investigate your wife, your father, your manager, and your doctor for conspiracy to commit murder?" Morrison asks, his voice carefully neutral. "I want you to find out the truth," Elvis replies, "whatever that truth is." What follows is the strangest month of Elvis's life. By day, he performs his regular routines, recording sessions, meetings with Colonel Parker, family dinners with Vernon, quiet evenings with Priscilla. He smiles at the right moments, laughs at their jokes, plays the role of the trusting husband and son. But underneath, every conversation is being recorded, every phone call monitored, every document photographed. Elvis has turned Graceland into a surveillance operation, and he's the primary target. Morrison works fast. Within 2 weeks, he's uncovered financial records that make Elvis's blood run cold. The insurance policies are real, massive policies taken out by Priscilla over the past 18 months. But that's not the most disturbing part. The most disturbing part is the recent changes to those policies, specific clauses about accidental death that would double or triple the payouts, language about death by misadventure related to prescription drug use, legal terminology that essentially turns Elvis's struggle with medication into a financial goldmine for his survivors. But then Morrison breaks into Dr. Nick's office, and everything Elvis thought he knew gets turned upside down again. The medical files are there, just as expected. Detailed records of Elvis's prescriptions, his psychological state, his physical decline. But buried in those files is something Morrison wasn't expecting to find. A second set of records, written in Priscilla's handwriting. These records tell a different story entirely. They document every time Dr. Nick increased Elvis's medication without medical justification. Every instance where Vernon pressured the doctor to prescribe stronger drugs. Every meeting where Colonel Parker discussed the financial benefits of Elvis's declining health. Priscilla hadn't just been documenting Elvis's condition. She'd been documenting the conspiracy against him. Morrison brings this evidence to Elvis on a Tuesday evening in late August. Elvis reads through the files in his study, his hands shaking as the pieces of a completely different puzzle start falling into place. "Mr. Presley," Morrison says quietly, "I think your wife has been trying to save your life." The revelation hits Elvis like a freight train. Every suspicious meeting, every secret phone call, every moment he'd interpreted as betrayal, it was all part of an elaborate plan to gather evidence against the real conspirators. But that means the overheard conversation in Beverly Hills had a completely different meaning. When they talked about cooperation and timing, they weren't planning Elvis's death. They were planning to expose the people who were slowly killing him. Elvis feels the world shift beneath his feet. The woman he'd been suspecting of betrayal had actually been fighting a shadow war to protect him. While he'd been drowning in paranoia and pills, she'd been building a legal case against the men who were orchestrating his decline. "The insurance policies?" Elvis asks, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why would she take out policies if she's trying to save me?" Morrison pulls out another folder. "She didn't take them out. Vernon did, forging your signature. She discovered them 3 months ago and has been working with attorneys to get them cancelled without alerting the conspirators." The betrayal Elvis feels now is different from anything he's experienced before. Not betrayal by Priscilla, but betrayal of Priscilla. His own father had been slowly poisoning him, literally and figuratively, while his wife fought desperately to save him. And Elvis's paranoid investigation might have just destroyed her carefully laid plans. "There's more," Morrison continues. "The meeting you overheard, your wife was wearing a wire. She's been gathering recorded evidence of their conversations for months." Elvis stares at the files spread across his desk. Evidence of prescription fraud, financial conspiracy, attempted murder through medical malpractice, all documented by the woman he'd stopped trusting, the woman whose love he'd questioned, the woman who'd been risking everything to save his life. "Jesus," Elvis whispers, "what have I done?" Because by investigating Priscilla, by having her followed and her activities monitored, he may have compromised her entire operation. If Vernon or Parker or Dr. Nick discover that she's been gathering evidence against them, they might accelerate their timeline. Or worse, they might make her disappear too. Elvis realizes he's at the center of an impossible choice. He can confront Priscilla and risk exposing her mission. He can confront the conspirators and risk his life. Or he can do nothing and watch as the people he loves most destroy each other in their attempts to save or kill him. But first, he needs to know how deep this goes. He needs to understand exactly how close he's come to dying and how close Priscilla has come to saving him. Morrison provides one final piece of evidence that makes Elvis's decision for him. Hidden cameras that Priscilla installed in Dr. Nick's office, recordings of conversations between Vernon and Parker about increasing the dosage and accelerating the timeline. They weren't just planning his death anymore, they were actively implementing it. Elvis makes a decision that will determine not just his survival, but whether love can overcome the corrupting power of money and fame. He's going to test everyone's loyalty one final time, using a method so dangerous that it could either expose the truth or get him killed in the process. He's going to stage his own medical emergency and see who comes to save him and who comes to finish the job. That night, August 15th, 1972, the night that began our story, Elvis sets his trap. He calls Vernon, Parker, and Dr. Nick, telling each of them that he's having chest pains, that he thinks he might be having a heart attack. Then he waits to see who will try to save Elvis Presley and who will try to bury him. The piece of paper in his kitchen that night would reveal who had been lying to him and who had been dying for him. But what happened when they all arrived at Graceland would determine whether the king of rock and roll lived to see another sunrise, or whether the people closest to him would finally get what they'd been planning for all along. August 15th, 1972, 3:47 a.m. We're back in that kitchen at Graceland, back to the moment where our story began. Elvis stands there holding that piece of paper, but now you understand what led him to this breaking point. Now you know why his hands are shaking. The fake medical emergency Elvis had staged 8 hours earlier had worked exactly as he'd planned, and exactly as he'd feared. When Elvis called his inner circle claiming chest pains, their responses told him everything he needed to know about who he could trust in this world. Vernon arrived first, carrying a bottle of pills and wearing an expression of concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Son, you need to take these," he said, pushing medication toward Elvis that wasn't prescribed for heart problems. "Dr. Nick said they'll help with the chest pain." Colonel Parker showed up 20 minutes later, not with medical help, but with legal documents. "Elvis, if something happens to you tonight, we need these signed," he said, spreading papers across the kitchen table while his client was supposedly having a cardiac episode. Insurance forms, estate modifications, the kind of paperwork that only makes sense if you're planning a funeral. Dr. Nick was the most revealing. When he arrived, he didn't check Elvis's pulse or blood pressure or any of the things a doctor should do for a heart attack patient. Instead, he immediately prepared a syringe with a sedative strong enough to put down a horse. "This will help you relax," he said, approaching Elvis with the needle like it was salvation instead of potentially his last breath. But Priscilla, her response broke Elvis's heart and healed it at the same time. She burst through the kitchen door like an avenging angel, took one look at the medication Vernon was pushing, the papers Parker was spreading, and the syringe Dr. Nick was preparing, and swept everything off the kitchen table in one furious motion. "Get out," she said, her voice deadly quiet. "All of you, get out of this house right now." "Now, Priscilla," Vernon started, "Elvis needs his medicine." "Elvis needs you to stop trying to kill him," she shot back, and suddenly everyone in that room understood that the game was over. She knew, she'd always known. After they left, Parker muttering about legal obligations, Vernon claiming concern for his son's health, Dr. Nick insisting he was just trying to help. Priscilla sat Elvis down and told him the truth about everything. The piece of paper he's holding now is her confession, written in her careful handwriting. The letter that explains how she discovered the conspiracy 6 months ago when she accidentally opened a piece of Vernon's mail containing insurance policy updates. How she realized that the people closest to Elvis were literally betting on his death. But the letter reveals something else, something that makes Elvis's betrayal of trust even more tragic. Priscilla had been planning to tell him everything that night. After months of gathering evidence, recording conversations, and building a legal case strong enough to put all three men in prison, she was finally ready to expose the truth. The secret meetings, the mysterious phone calls, the trips to Beverly Hills. It was all leading up to this moment when she would hand over enough evidence to destroy the conspiracy and save Elvis's life. But his investigation of her had complicated everything, because Vernon, Parker, and Dr. Nick had started to suspect that someone was watching them. Someone was asking too many questions, getting too close to their operation. They'd moved up their timeline. What was supposed to be a gradual decline over months had become an urgent need to act within weeks. Elvis's fake heart attack hadn't just been a test, it had been their planned moment to finish the job. "I wanted to save you," Priscilla's letter says, "but I was running out of time and I wasn't sure you'd believe me. I wasn't sure you'd trust me enough to listen." Elvis sits in that kitchen reading his wife's words, understanding for the first time in months that he hasn't been fighting enemies. He's been fighting his guardian angel. The evidence Priscilla gathered is staggering. Recorded conversations of Vernon discussing life insurance benefits with Colonel Parker. Medical records showing Dr. Nick's systematic increase of Elvis's prescriptions far beyond therapeutic levels. Financial documents proving that all three men stood to gain millions from Elvis's death while losing everything if he got clean and took control of his career. But here's where the story takes a turn that nobody saw coming, not even Priscilla. Those recordings she made, they still exist, hidden in a safety deposit box in downtown Memphis, along with copies of all the medical records, financial documents, and insurance policies. Evidence that could rewrite the official story of Elvis Presley's decline and death. And they weren't just planning to kill Elvis. The conspiracy was bigger than anyone imagined. Recent analysis of Priscilla's evidence by forensic accountants has revealed a pattern of systematic theft that had been going on for years. Millions of dollars diverted from Elvis's earnings into accounts controlled by Vernon and Colonel Parker. Dr. Nick wasn't just overprescribing medication, he was billing Elvis's insurance for treatments and procedures that never happened. Elvis's death would have covered up the financial crimes while triggering massive insurance payouts. A perfect crime, orchestrated by the people who claimed to love him most. But there's one more twist to this story, one that brings us into the present day. In 2022, a documentary filmmaker gained access to some of Elvis's personal recordings from this period. What they found were hours of secret tapes Elvis made after discovering Priscilla's investigation. Tapes where he talks about his guilt, his paranoia, and his realization that the woman he'd stopped trusting had been the only one trying to save his life. On one tape, recorded just days before his actual death in 1977, Elvis talks about that night in August 1972. "I spent 5 years knowing that Priscilla saved my life," his voice says through the static. 5 years knowing that I destroyed our marriage because I couldn't tell the difference between love and betrayal. The tragedy isn't just that Elvis discovered the conspiracy too late to save his marriage. It's that he spent his final years carrying the weight of understanding that his paranoia had driven away the one person who was actually protecting him. Priscilla never remarried after their divorce. She never spoke publicly about what she discovered in 1972. Even now, 50 years later, she maintains her silence about the depths of the conspiracy that nearly killed the man she loved. But sometimes, in interviews, when reporters ask about her relationship with Elvis, there's a sadness in her eyes that suggests She's carrying secrets that could change how the world remembers the king of rock and roll. The recordings still exist, locked away in that Memphis safety deposit box. Priscilla holds the key, the evidence that could prove Elvis Presley wasn't just a victim of fame and addiction, but the target of a calculated murder plot orchestrated by his own family. Every day she wakes up knowing that she had been his secret guardian, gathering evidence that could have saved his life and sent his killers to prison. Every day she lives with the knowledge that love wasn't enough to overcome the paranoia that fame had planted in his heart. The piece of paper that started our story, Priscilla's confession letter, ends with words that Elvis would carry until his grave. "I would have died for you. Instead, I had to watch you die believing I was your enemy. That's a pain no amount of money can ever heal." Elvis spent his final years knowing that the person he'd suspected of betrayal had actually been his guardian angel. If you discovered someone you'd stopped trusting had been protecting you all along, would it be too late to fix what was broken? Those secret recordings still exist in Memphis, and Priscilla has never confirmed or denied this story publicly. What do you think? Was she Elvis's secret savior, or is there an even deeper truth we still don't know? Tell me what you believe happened that night.